you write, the American right wing is a subject I find endlessly fascinating, and unlike some of my liberal colleagues, I believe it to be a timeless and permanent fixture of the American political landscape, its individual characteristics swinging between the twin poles of racism and money. And that observation of yours, I mean, it's interesting because you write that for you that awareness comes from growing up in a conservative family, and I feel like I have a similar perspective on our politics that is really, I think, more informed, frankly, from the fact that I came from a performing background, and was more. I mean, I think that I guess the sense that I have of the right in this country is that it is so much driven by this sort of, I don't know what to call it other than sort of like infotainment on some level, and that it is, I mean, for instance, I just want to and I want to talk about how you got to that sort of observation from your background, but just as an example, I mean, one of the things, there's this this hullabaloo about one of the Duck Dynasty guys, and for people who don't watch reality TV, it's a show about a family of guys who all look like they're from ZZ Top, who became rich selling duck calling devices. And it basically is this sort of fake reality show. As someone who has some familiarity with that industry, it's completely scripted. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind, at least to the extent that they set up these scenarios. And apparently one of these guys was interviewed in GQ and said some pretty offensive things about gay people, and that blacks had it, we're always happy before civil rights. And that in and of itself is not surprising, and surprising that he was suspended. What I was shocked by most by this whole controversy was that Bobby Jindal, a guy who we were just talking about several years ago as very well likely to be the next presidential Republican nominee, is out there releasing press releases defending these guys. And that just seems so far afield from what the perspective of those in the Beltway would understand as to what the conservative movement is all about.
What you mean in terms of the freedom of corporations to do whatever they want?
Well, I just mean
the freedom of corporate persons, I should say.
Well, we couldn't even get, let's say, the Democrats, were all participating in a censure of Move On, for instance, back in the day. And there was some shock that Bobby Jindal would do this by some sort of, some who are sort of more ensconced in the sort of the media, and my sense is like, this is completely typical. This is.
Of course it is. This is exactly what they do. I remember I wrote a piece years ago called "The Art of the Hissy Fit," which was about how the Republicans gin up these ridiculous controversies. And basically the whole point of it is to get liberals to, start behaving like morons and running around trying to defend themselves and trying to, say that basically they agree with the right wing on these things. This is a perfect hissy fit because, first of all, I don't know who watches this Duck Dynasty show. I mean, I guess that it must be fairly popular, but it's a cable reality show, right? I mean, it's not like it's Survivor or something.
Right, exactly.
It's just, there's some kind of small subculture of people who are watching Duck Dynasty, and I guess it's successful. I mean, I'm not one of them. I watched it once and kind of, like you say, it seems pretty scripted to me. It's not very interesting. But, so they use this as a way to sort of, and by the way, just one of the defining characteristics of the right wing, and I don't understand why liberals don't get this. They don't care about hypocrisy. That word has no meaning to them. It is not something they are laughing at anybody who calls out hypocrisy as being some kind of a meaningful, insult to them, because they've retired the concept. It doesn't mean anything. So to call them hypocrites and say, well, wait, you people all say that you believe in free speech and that corporations should have the right to hire and fire and do whatever they feel, and now you're saying that A&E doesn't have a right to do that. Well, like, the right wing cares about that. I mean, it's insane. They don't care. They're basically using this as a way. Bobby Jindal, of all people, who was once considered the great, he's Indian American, right?
Right.
Or his parents were. He's American, but he was Indian American extraction, but a Southern boy, and he was the perfect amalgam of the modern Republican Party, who was going to bridge all of these chasms between black and white and rich and poor and God knows what else. Well, the guy has proven himself over and over again to be a wingnut. That is who he is. I mean, he gave. You remember the rebuttal he gave to
Yes.
to the president's State of the Union, in which he was complaining about how people wanted the government to pay for volcano monitoring, like that was some kind of crazy government scam that was taking money out of the pockets of good, hardworking taxpayers. I mean, he's an absurdity, and he has been. But I think what we're getting to here, though, Sam, is that who isn't? I mean, in the Republican Party. I mean, you and I are observers of the right. I think it's interesting that you come at it from the standpoint of a performer, because you know it when you see it, right? I mean, you can
exactly.
tell that these people are basically performers. And, and not to say that they aren't sincere in their beliefs, but a lot of what they do is very much designed to get a rise out of the other side, to get publicity for what they're doing. A lot of them are doing it to raise money for themselves. It's a
Indeed.
tried and true method. And ginning. I mean, look at Sarah Palin. I mean, she's a perfect example
Exactly.
of a showbiz conservative.
Exactly. I mean, the difference between Sarah Palin and, let's say, Kathy Griffin is really just a matter of, that Kathy Griffin has moments of being genuinely funny.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really
there's the talent factor.
It's the same, but the trajectory, the strategy, it's all the same. And we should remind people that Bobby Jindal, almost to the year ago, said we've got to stop being the stupid party. Coming out and saying, I'm going to defend this guy on this reality show to say that, men's anuses or whatever the heck that he said it's just beyond sort of, you cannot maintain a position that these people are functioning like what we all imagined in our fairy tales about politicians and government officials, when they constantly are giving you evidence that that's not the game that they're playing, and that the idea of there's gonna, the fever's gonna break, we were told after some elections and this and that. And that's the point of your piece, is that there is no fever. Because a fever implies a sort of a passing state of being, and it's not going to break because it doesn't exist. Their body temperature runs at 102 all the time. There's no fever.
No, I mean this is America. I guess that's a depressing thing. People tell me I'm depressing because I say this, that America is, and always has been, defined by the tension between these two warring factions. However those are organized. I mean, they've been organized in different ways over the years. I mean, there's North and South, there's, the old Republicans versus the old Democrats, and all that has moved around in terms of, somewhat in terms of region, although it's still very, one side is still very much centered in the South. But nonetheless, that tension that exists, and it's a strong tension. It's not, all cultures have this to some degree, between conservative and, more liberal thinking. But this is very, very strong, and it's definitional. Our Constitution was built around these compromises between these two warring philosophies of how the world should be organized. And that, it waxes and wanes to some degree. I mean, this is, in my opinion, it's like a tug of war. It's not a pendulum. And it's pulled in one direction or the other. Sometimes it's an equal force. Sometimes it goes further into one direction than the other. But it's always there. And, the fever that animates the right wing, this, fervent belief that they are under siege, that they are victims, that they are being dominated, even when they're not. I mean, you and I both remember we were commenting daily during the Bush years when they had everything. They had the full Congress. They had the Supreme Court. They had the White House. They were running wars that, had no real support and were based on lies and basically doing whatever they wanted to do. And yet they were victims. In their own minds, they were being dominated by liberals. I even remember Chris Matthews saying in the middle of the Bush years, it was maybe 2005, maybe 2004, talking about, how Tom Daschle was running everything in
Right.
Washington. I'm just kind of going, you're kidding me. I mean, this view of themselves as being besieged is their identity. It's the way that they see themselves in the world, regardless of their actual power. And interestingly, and I've written about this a lot on the blog, Lincoln talked about that in his Cooper Union speech, that it didn't matter. The South had plenty of political power before the war broke out. It wasn't as if they were completely dominated by the North. There was nothing they could do, that they had no choice but to fire those shots on Fort Sumter. That's just not true. They had plenty of political power and probably could have gotten more if they'd wanted to. They just reached a point where they just, were mad as hell and they weren't going to take it anymore. I mean, that's how the reality of political power within the system just is not something these people actually acknowledge. It is about them, sort of insisting on total dominance. And they can't always get it, obviously. I mean, at least within the structure that we have. I mean, the Civil War was a break with that structure, obviously. It didn't work out well for them in the long run, but nonetheless, that this idea is still very much pervasive with them, and it's always there. And liberals need to wrap their minds around this. This is an ongoing battle. It's not one where we come to some moment of kumbaya and go, yay. And liberals love to do this, by the way. We love to, get up on TV and congratulate ourselves for our victory and talk about how, it's all over, that we declare that the right has been vanquished once and for all. I mean, we do it after every election of a Democrat to the presidency. We certainly
Right.
did it in 2008, and we just did it again.
Oh, and I think it was
They're
done.
over.
Frankly, I mean, my whole, recollection of the Clinton era was just people just going to sleep at that point. Like, it's finally over. Reagan is done. We've gotten rid of George Bush, the senior, and all is going to be well now. And on some level, that is also, I think, plays right into sort of the more neoliberal tendencies of the Democrats, because that's when the real damage in many respects is done. Frankly,
Yes.
Because there's less rallying around it. But the interesting thing is you talk about the individual characteristics swinging between the twin poles of racism and money, and for me, racism and those poles are not even. I'm not even sure that those poles ultimately are as distinct as we might think they are in some way. I mean, when Jindal comes out and, the guy who said, we got to stop being the stupid party, comes out basically supporting the idea that, it's wrong to say that somebody who is such a homophobe and, has this notion that, blacks had it better before this whole civil rights thing. The racism has morphed into, and maybe it's not morphed, I mean, maybe it's just sort of baked into the cake of this sort of cultural identifiers that now for the right seems to, as I think, like as the racism, and this is not to say that racism has lost its potency, but it's become somewhat diluted for them. They have had to sort of expand the portfolio of their cultural identifiers. Homophobia, misogyny, even gun ownership. The idea of like expanded government, which I'm not so sure is really, that far divorced from racism.